democracy system. No, I must place the unions in proper perspective for people to understand.
Hello and welcome to the program. Now, the 2017 Labor Day is one workers' day that will not be forgotten in a hurry in Nigeria, especially in the nation's capital, Abuja. It was a Labor Day that was totally devoid of the usual long speeches by the president or his representatives, march past by labor unions, and of course other ceremonial activities to mark the workers. Actually, those ceremonies took place, but not for a very long time. Well, Nigerian workers at this year's May Day chose to vent their anger on the ruling class by preventing the Minister of Labor, Chris Ngige, from making any speech on behalf of the president. Now, Chris Ngige was actually the representative of the president at that rally. The workers in their anger shouted down the minister, expressing their unwillingness to listen to any speech or promises from government. Now, Dr. Ngige was not the only top personality that incurred the wrath of the workers. The Senate President, Bukola Saraki, and his counterpart in the House of Representatives, Yakubu Dogara, were also booed by the visibly angry workers. They were whisked away actually by their security details when the situation was becoming riotous and the workers started throwing sachets of water and cans to the rostrum where the dignitaries were seated. Now, former governor of Edo State and one-time labor leader Adams Oshomole actually intervened, but he was unable to bring the situation under control. He was prevented actually from making any speech by the workers. Now, the bone of contention for the workers is pay rise. Nigerian labor unions have been clamoring for an increase in minimum wage for some time. The minimum wage was last increased in 2011 from 7,500 to 18,000 naira. Now, this was after years of face-off between labor unions and the government. But the workers say 18,000 minimum wage can no longer meet the realities of today. And they are quite right, if you ask me. Last year, Labour submitted a proposal of 56,000 naira to the federal government as new minimum wage. But this is yet to be officially discussed and bargained to arrive at a consensus. Now, Boboy Kagama, who is the president of the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, says, aside high inflationary rate, Nigeria's 18,000 naira minimum wage is about the lowest in Africa and condemns a bill sponsored by a lawmaker that's in the House of Representatives now, who is seeking to remove the national minimum wage from the exclusive list of the to the concurrent list, describing it as ill-advised. Now, let's take a listen to some of the speeches from that rally that took place. Because before this whole thing degenerated into the chaos you're watching right now, the president of the Nigerian Labour Congress actually had his time to speak, as well as the president of the Trade Union Congress. So let's take a listen to both men, as well as some other people too, some workers too, who attended that rally.
That we expected to come out of the palliative committee was a technical committee that will prepare the preliminaries for setting up a tripartite committee to negotiate a new minimum wage. Comrades, you will recall that NLC and our counterpart TUC had submitted a written demand since last year, immediately before the May Day, to demand for the review of the 18,000 minimum wage, even before the fuel price increase, which had triggered huge increases in cost of transportation and in the attainment of spiral increase in the cost of most consumer items and services across the value chain. The technical committee has recently submitted a report to government, and we call on government, without any further delay, to constitute all structures that are needed to facilitate negotiation and completion of the demand for a new minimum wage, because Nigerians and workers are running out of patience, as demonstrated here today.
Government has been dilly-dallying on this. Not until these issues are more practically addressed, the tripartite committee is put in place. Obviously, what we call the beginning of the end is coming.
We all came out here expecting an announcement concerning minimum wage. You are aware that Nigerians are suffering, workers especially are suffering, whose salaries are stagnant. For more than 5 years, we've been on one minimum wage. Somebody once told us somewhere that the minimum wage they are paying, which is 18,000 naira, is just enough to take you from your house to the corruption center. Today is not even enough to take you to correction center. So what are we here for? What are we here to say? What are you coming to tell us now if you are not talking about minimum wage? How long does it take to form a committee to give us new minimum wage, which you know is not enough for us? That is why we are agitating.
Let me tell you, sir, the only power as a comrade you have as a comrade is Congress. There's power in the Congress. We have nothing like a tool to fight the government. It's the power in the Congress, and our voices must be heard. They've been sitting round table since how many years? Okay, imagine how can a government that claims that they are sensitive to the plight of the people sit for FECBT on Wednesday when they know that on Friday there's no work, and we have not collected salary up to this moment. Most of us are living on borrowed money, and you collect loan from bank, and bank they put it on 25 that they must pay you salary. Once it passes 25, there will be some interest added to it. Come from that angle. Now I'm owing the bank. The bank has doubled my payment. There's no money for me. Even if I collect salary, I don't have.
Well, no doubt, angry workers there. But if you ask me, you get the impression that these workers must have seen the speech of the president. I mean, that speech was supposed to be delivered by Dr. Chris Ngige, who was the representative of the president at that event. He did not even deliver the speech at all. So there's a possibility that the workers had already seen that speech for them to have known that he was not going to talk about the minimum wage. And that's the reason why they disrupted the gathering, even before Dr. Chris Ngige actually got on that podium to make his speech. But then there are quite a number of questions, I mean, with this national minimum wage. The current national minimum wage in the country is 18,000 naira. And as we speak today, quite a number of state governments have still not been able to pay salaries. So many of them are owing. As a matter of fact, over 20 states in Nigeria today have not been able to pay their workers for several months. So the 18,000 naira minimum wage, a tough call for some of the state governments. And then labor unions are now demanding 56,000 naira. We're talking about, there's another body also, that's the United Labour Congress. Actually, they are demanding 96,000 naira, if that is correct. So far and above what the NLC is asking for. The question is, well, we'll just wait and see if the government would be able to pay, because obviously the Senate and the National Assembly as a whole has said, well, workers' salaries should be increased, the national minimum wage should be increased, but the question is, does the government actually have the muscle to pay? Joining me to discuss this and more, I have Achike Chude, who is, of course, a member of the United Action, Joint Action Front. And then we have Chris Onyeka, who is the Secretary General of the United Labour Congress. Deputy Secretary General, actually, of the United Labour Congress. Let me start with you, the Labour man. I know your own body is asking for 96,000, not even 56,000.
Yeah, you are correct.
Is that realistic?
Very, very realistic. I think that 96,000 is actually...
For an economy that is currently challenged, seriously challenged.
Yeah, when an economy is challenged, the worker's salary is a way out of recession. It's one of the key factors out of recession. Because when you empower workers by increasing their salaries, you increase purchasing power. When you increase purchasing power, what?
You're quite right. You're quite right. But the problem is, where do you get the money to pay this?
Yes, the government budget has burgeoned from 3 million, 4 million to 6, 7 million. Where did the money come from? Trillion. Where did it come from? The naira, the exchange rate of the naira has depreciated in value, and so the quantum of effects that the country is receiving has also bloomed, and so naturally, the salary of the workers ought to also...
No question at all.
Yes.
Nobody is arguing.
And so the money is available. In naira terms.
You think...
In naira terms, it's available.
It's possible.
Yeah,
in naira terms. Realistic 96,000 naira that your own organization, the United Labour Congress... Very, very possible. ...is asking.
Very, very possible. I can give you the mathematics. We're talking about 96,000 when you look at the cost of living index. Okay? A rice is a staple. It's moved from 7,000 to about 21. That is how many percent? Okay? Gari, a pint of Gari has doubled, not doubled, about quadrupled in price. Housing has also done the same. Clothes and other things have also multiplied in the same. And so if you're talking of 18,000 multiplied by 4, you're talking about 70 or 80 something thousand naira per month. That's what you're talking about. The cost of living as of 2011 has multiplied 4 or 5 times.
Absolutely.
And so if you multiply 18 by 5 or by 4, you will get nearly 96,000. And this is negotiation. And when we ask for 96,000, that is an offer we have made. Government has to make a counter offer.
Exactly.
Okay, and so that is a proposal that we have made.
a proposal that can actually come down.
Yes.
Achike, I mean, you look at it. There's no question at all. 18,000 naira is not tenable in the country today. It's just not tenable. But then 96,000. You have 96 on the table, and then you have 56. It's really difficult to tell how the government will deal with this. I mean, the two unions asking different things, but it appears the government is dealing with, you know, the NLC, the mainstream NLC, so to speak. But just give me your take on this. You think 56,000 might be more realistic?
Well, I think...
I mean, there's no question. The Nigerian worker, if you ask me, I mean, should even get, if possible, 200,000 I mean, per month. It's just the truth.
Yeah, I think one way is, I think he talked about, Chris talked about the cost of living index and all of that. You know, what makes, what will make the life of the average Nigerian more comfortable, much more comfortable than this, than the way they have been living. Again, you want to look at, because the argument even before now has been that the government lacks the inability, you know, to pay. But let us also not forget that before the 18,000 naira was reached, there were some state governments that were willing to pay 36, you know, even 45,000 naira, you know, but then they had to bow to the persuasive powers.
Question is how many state governments?
Yes.
Because as we speak today, quite a number of states, over 20 as a matter of fact, are owing their workers.
But let us even look at this issue of inability more deeply, you know. When our politicians, our leaders, the political class, governors and governments in this country give the impression by the way they conduct themselves that this country has much more, you know, to give. And let us practical examples, for instance. We don't know, and maybe the journalists have not exactly been able to give us an idea how much is being stolen every year in this country, first of all, from every tier of government. And I think this is a responsibility, a duty that the journalists themselves owe this country. We must be able to have an idea how much is leaving, you know, the coffers of government through, you know, stealing and all of that, first of all. That's a lot of money. I mean, from one house alone, we discovered about 13 to 15 billion naira, one apartment in this country, and then all over this country, the same thing is going on. So that gives you an idea that if all of this, so it's a job that they have to do. That's one. And then again, we have often talked about the security votes. And if there's any kind of stealing that is legalized in this country, it is the issue of security votes. Some states are collecting, you know, 500 million naira every month. Some about 1 billion naira, the very rich states and the rest. Now, you know, you multiply that by 12.
And some states are collecting far less.
Far less.
And
maybe 100 million. Maybe 100 million and the rest, you know, all of that. And then ultimately at the end of the day, put all of these states together and ask yourself, do we think the government can do much more? Yes, that is the answer. The government can do much more. And besides, it is critical that we even take away monies from some of these politicians.
Something else I also want to look at, because usually when you talk about government, you're always looking at the federal government. But let's not forget that this national minimum wage we're talking about goes beyond the federal government. Exactly. We're talking about the state governments. We're even talking about the private sector, if you like, and all of that, even though the private sector, as far as I'm concerned, never uses the national minimum wage. I mean, it does more than that. It pays more than that. But fact is that it goes beyond that.
Exactly.
And you talked about revenue for the states. Fact is, all the states are not the same. What Lagos makes, you know, as revenue every month is far and above what probably 20 states.
The more reasons they could even pay more. If they are so willing, if they are so inclined.
That's what I'm saying. For states that make more, they can pay more. But for states that don't make, how do you deal with that? How exactly do you deal with that? Because that is one of the reasons why we're having this situation where quite a number of states are still not able to pay their workers.
You see, at the heart of these unpaid salary issues or minimum wage issue is the difference between, you know, inability and willingness. It is not, like he has said, it is not that the state governments do not have the ability to pay, but they are not willing to pay.
Some of them actually,
some of them do not have the ability. Let me give you an example why I say they are not, the willingness that is a problem. They collected bailout. bailout funds from the federal government. And that was monies that were designed for the state governments to pay salaries.
Yeah.
What happened? They didn't pay.
Abuse, of course.
They didn't pay. And that is willingness. They were unwilling to pay. So at the heart of it is unwillingness to pay. They see the payment of workers' salary as charity. That what they are doing to workers is that they are giving workers something that the workers did not work for. It's a charity, and so we should clap for them when they pay salary. But they do not understand the centrality of salary to a worker. Because a worker is a human being. When you call him worker, it's as if you take away the humanness. He's a human being like you and me that has children, that has to feed them, has to put them through school,
the
has
reason
to pay housing.
I mean, let's
so they have ability.
Let's go back. I mean, a couple of months back, maybe sometime late last year, where this issue of state governors not being able to pay salaries. If you remember, then the governors forum actually met, and all the governors met, and they said the way things were back then, especially towards the end of last year, and they said the way things were, that it would be difficult for them to pay, the backlog of salaries they were owing, that the only way that they could do that would be to sack some workers.
You see, that has always been,
ultimately, at 18,000.
Ultimately, that has always been the blackmail that they come up with, But the reality is this: look, these people are not just governors or political leaders; they are managers of states. And so what you do when you have issues, what has happened to this country is not a new thing. Everybody saw it coming.
Yeah.
For so long have people talked about the need to diversify the economy, for the need to, begin to look for other means of earning revenue for this country. We still maintain that this country is one of the most blessed countries in the world. We have everything that it takes.
Does it make sense to you?
No, yes.
Go on, because very important question I actually wanted to ask you. Does it make sense to you that a state would have, for instance, a population of 45,000 workers, and those workers cannot actually make the money they actually need to pay themselves?
No, it's not that.
A typical example is Osun State.
It depends on
that the workers
of the
too cannot even make the money they need to pay themselves.
It's not the fault of the workers, but the fault, like you were saying, managers, the leadership. It is the leadership that does what mobilizes the resources, and they have not factored into, they have not keyed into the fact that their workers remain the key resource for the development of the states.
You don't think some of these states, whether you like it or not, they just have a bloated workforce?
No,
some of these workers are just redundant.
There are those who have made the argument that a large population is inimical to the progress to development and so on of countries and the rest. But the reality is that if you look at populations are population is a very critical, element of national power.
If you have a population that is not,
you must engage your population. That is why, for instance, today all over Europe there are all kinds of issues because the youthful population that should be driving the economy forward is no longer there. Why do you think that they open their doors to immigration? It is not for the love of foreigners. It is simply because they need the workforce to make up for what they lack in terms of the population. And so these are some of the issues. And of course, if you look at some of the big economies of the world that are fairly doing well, they have very large populations. India is an example today. China is an example. Russia is also an example. Brazil, even though they are facing
so basically for some of those state governments, they are not putting the workforce to proper use.
Exactly.
These are some of the issues. Provide the base.
Look at
IGR.
Yes. Look at IGR. Use the workforce to drive your IGR.
Because it's quite surprising that you would have a workforce about 45,000, and that workforce cannot actually generate the revenue. Not the revenue you need to even run the state, but the revenue to pay itself.
Them. And that's a problem. That's a crisis because the leadership has refused to identify them.
But I also have a problem when you keep pushing the blame to the leadership. Let's face it, even the workers do have their own problems.
No. You cannot blame the victim. The workers are the victims here. No, you can't.
I don't think I want to. I don't think I'll agree with that analysis of the victim.
Some time ago, I think it was even Adams Oshomole before he left that was one that made that argument when people say, look, the workers don't do anything, and so on. I said, how can you accuse the workers of not doing anything when you have not given them something to do? These are also part of the issues, and they are critical issues. So the reality again is that, the reality is that any way you look at it, it is very difficult to hold workers, exactly responsible for what is going on.
And then again, they are partly responsible.
And again, when you run an economy, for instance, that is capital capitalist-oriented as we have in this country, where you feel that government has no business, for instance, being involved in the means of even making extra money. Because when you made that statement, for instance, I understand where you're coming from, but the reality, is that the nature of the capitalism that we practice, today is such that even those enterprises that are government-owned enterprises, for instance, are declared moribund on the basis of the fact that they are owned by government. So they say, do not put money in moribund, government enterprises. But really, what is happening? One of the major examples is what is happening in the power sector today. 200 and something billion last year given to them, even though they are private concerns now. $801 billion again given to them this year, and the rest. And yet, I don't even know, I'm not even sure that the quantum of money being given to them as privatized enterprises, today, was the kind of money that was being given to them by government. So the reality is that somewhere along the line, we have to look at certain models. Look at what happened, for instance, with the LNG. Everybody's talking about the LNG. When they were thinking about selling, the Nigerians said, no, you cannot, because this is one of the few viable enterprises that we have. Government has an interest in. And so what do? Why not use the LNG model that is giving, the government very handsome rewards at the end of the day? In Lagos here, you have skyscrapers, massive infrastructure, and the rest. Why not develop this infrastructure? Bring in, foreign people to manage some of this infrastructure, and then let them make money also for the government. National Theatre and the rest. That's why I said, look, that these people are also supposed to be managers of the economy, and they are mismanaging the economy.
Let me get your reaction to a lawmaker who, if you ask me, I think actually makes some sense, saying that the national minimum wage should be removed from the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent list. I mean, that way it gives, basically states now the opportunity to negotiate with their workers to fix their own minimum wage. So you could have, while you could have a minimum wage for federal workers, you should also have a minimum wage for state workers, so to speak. Because the reason is, practically speaking, is it possible to have a national minimum wage where it says this is a national minimum wage? You are equating a small state to the federal government.
That's actually, I think it's lack of proper understanding of what the wage floor, a national minimum wage floor, is all about. It seeks to protect the ones from the weak states. It seeks to protect the small workers. Okay, so it's a wage floor. It's a minimum standard. That does not mean that there should be no variableness in it.
No. When something is minimum, you just can't go below that.
Exactly. And so the rich states are expected to go above it, while the poor states can stay.
Listen, okay, go on. Go on. Let him finish.
The idea behind the minimum wage is to protect this group of workers, okay, who cannot on their own, wherever they are, protect or drive their wages. And now, if a state...
So on their own, at the state level, they cannot negotiate?
On their own.
To fix their own minimum wage.
They do not have the power to do that. They do not have the capacity to negotiate a wage floor. And now, when you talk about removing the minimum wage, especially labor issues, from the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent list, now you are going to create a whole lot of problem. In many nations of the world, you have a national minimum wage floor. Okay, and that is nationally driven. It's just like when you're talking about inflationary rate.
No doubt.
When you're talking about inflationary rate, you're talking about a national inflationary rate. It cuts across everywhere, every part of it. These are macro variables, macroeconomic variables. And so when the minimum wage is negotiated at the national level, the states are also involved in that negotiation. And they bring their input. They bring their input into that particular negotiation process. All of us are involved. It's a tripartite process.
You see,
it's not something that is done arbitrarily. The state governors are also involved.
That because I wanted to say that it was not even logical on the basis of what we see on ground. And he has just pointed it out that the states themselves were involved. And remember, I told you when we started this conversation that some states wanted to pay about 45,000 naira, 35,000 naira, and that's what, but were prevailed upon by other states who were not as well endowed to come down to meet their own level.
Accepted. But don't you think that in that case, don't you think there's also that in the long run, what this lawmaker is proposing might actually be beneficial.
No,
it is not beneficial.
I mean, because
can I say something? Can I say something?
The reason I'm saying is because, as you said, it gives states, for instance, who can pay more than the national to actually pay more.
And can
because
I
there
say
are states who
something?
can actually pay more than the federal government.
Let me make this argument. I mean, we talk about the need for fiscal federalism and then the right, proper federalism in this country and the rest. And then we look at the United States, for instance, where we borrowed, this form of democracy from, and we say yes, this is the example of a country that really knows how to practice federalism and the rest, and yet they have a national minimum wage. But the reality is that yes, in as much as you might be a citizen of Lagos
even
State,
over there in the United States, they are protesting the national minimum wage.
Wait. But it's holding. But the reality is that even though you're a citizen of Lagos State or Taraba State or whichever state, you are still a citizen of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So the government itself, at that level, also believes that it has a duty, has a mandate, you understand, to set a minimum wage that should be applicable to people, so that the states themselves, through arbitrariness, will not subject their citizens to certain level of abuse and the rest. So the government comes up with a threshold that is agreed by all the states in this country. So it's on that basis. And besides, even I think the man that made that statement you are referring to, the lawmaker, is also a politician and a political elite. Part of the problem of this country. Why do I say so? They make this statement when it suits them. But when you talk about the allocation to them in terms of salaries, emoluments, and so on, by the fiscal, revenue and mobilization commission, in the country, they are not looking at, because they fix salaries of governors, fix salaries of lawmakers, fix salaries of this. So why not remove it also from the exclusive list and send it to the states? But because they are benefiting handsomely from that kind of situation, they never mention that. You understand? When it comes to the ordinary worker that is getting a paltry amount of money on a monthly basis and so on, they say, look, this has become a problem. But what they are getting, the political elites in this country, is not a problem.
Because for me, my biggest worry is I hate to see a situation where you agree on a national minimum wage, and at the end of the day, some states are not able to pay. As we have it now with the 18,000 naira.
Why would you agree?
Some state governors have not been able to pay.
He has
for
just approved. We had bailout 1. We had bailout 2. We had bailout 3. Now they had money. Everybody knew that they have money, and they did not pay these things. So that gives you an idea that it might not.
In 2011, 56,000 naira was what we proposed, and at the end of the day, we were prevailed upon to accept 18,000 naira, from 56 to 18,000. 2011, and it expired last year, and that is 1 year gone. Nothing is done, and people are pretending as if we should continue like that. And so I believe that the labor movement, the workers...
you need a salary. I mean, whether we like it or not, the national minimum wage has to go up. The only problem is...
It's a scandal.
In other societies, it's automatically adjusted upwards on annual basis. Once inflationary rate goes beyond the threshold, it goes up.
Unfortunately,
but here we celebrate, we politicize it.
Unfortunately, this is a different society.
It's a terrible
just before we wrap up, I mean, something actually happened in the National Assembly. I'm beginning to get the impression, because in the past, you would not have the National Assembly come out so openly to say, look, increase the national minimum wage. But for the first time, we're seeing the National Assembly now come out, know, to say that the national minimum wage should go up. I just want to get your take on that, because could it be, because there's something just happened. The National Assembly has decided to increase its budget, from 120 billion to 150. They reduced it before, but now they said because of the inflationary trend in the country, they've increased it now to 150 billion. That budget, of course, will be, I understand, probably would be debated finally next week, and then probably we'll see a passage. But could it be that these lawmakers are now asking for an increase in the national minimum wage just because, just to justify their action?
You see, the fact is that it is the duty of National Assembly to actually review, because the minimum wage is an act.
Because
it's an act of the National Assembly.
It just would not be justifiable if they were increasing their own budget.
The National Assembly is supposed to feel the pulse of the people. They are actually closer to the people than the executive, because they are the ones that are closer, that are the grassroots. And so most of the problem that we have, we relate to the National Assembly first before we relate to the executive. And so the National Assembly feels our pulse. But if they are going to tie at the increment in national minimum wage
To
their
their own
whatever,
budget.
that becomes unfortunate. And that is a different ballgame altogether. The national minimum wage should not be politicized. It should not be tied to anything. It should not be a conditional thing.
Because, I mean, 120 to 150 billion, and then they are saying because of the
about 25%
You
increase.
see, they are also looking at the signs of the times, and they do not bode well for them, for their interest. All over the country, members of the National Assembly who go home maybe for the first time in a very long time are being harassed and attacked by their members, by their constituencies and the rest. You know, so they see all of these things. People are not happy. They see the anger. And so even government officials at the federal level too, not the executive and so on, also realize the fact that, look, perhaps we have done, too much harm, to the economy and the welfare of Nigerians. You will see that typified by the responses, not even in Abuja,
So,
in
so
many
that,
parts
that
of
could
the
just
country.
be the basic reason
So
why
there is serious pressure
and not
today
really because
on the political class. But the reality again is that, look, knowing these people, they are self-serving. We all know it's about themselves. So, I mean, if they increased their budget, for instance, people who are wallowing in obscene, splendor, and wealth, without looking at the 18,000, that scandalous 18,000, abominable 18,000 that is being paid to Nigerian workers, it is going to add, more to, it's going to be more of a pressure point, to them. And so it's an indirect way of trying to protect themselves by looking at the welfare by default of the Nigerian worker. Because it's clear that the kind of response that they are going to get from Nigerians over this, because Nigerians already see them as people who are over pampered and spoiled, people who do not add anything to the economy in terms of lawmaking and all of that. So it could be a way of trying to diffuse the consequences of increasing their own
Anyway, gentlemen,
money.
thank you very much for coming on the program. I know that negotiation is going to be very tough. It's not going to be easy at all when you consider a lot of things. It's not going to be easy. But the fact is that 18,000 naira minimum wage is no longer tenable at all.
It's abominable.
It's not tenable.
It's
not
an
tenable.
insult.
It's not.
And
And by the way, it's not as if
it's a shameful thing.
something I had always wanted. Is it that when you say 18,000, that's just the basic salary? It's not a C. We're not talking about other allowances and others. No, I'm just asking.
It's better you don't
It's
pick
so
it up
that,
here.
no, it's just for us to have a proper understanding.
Yeah, because
the impression you get is when they say 18,000, it's like 18,000 is what people. I mean, if 18,000 is your basic, you still have other allowances and all of that, and that pushes the whole thing up.
No, it's not.
I think we're going to end on that note.
So people understand. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to this program. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be discussing something else. Every day, every hour, and every minute, news break in Nigeria. Things happen so fast, it's most times difficult to track and comprehend them. But that's what we do right here on DEJI360. 2015, would you want to come back again?
It's like asking Jesus Christ if he knew he was going to die, will you want to come back as the savior of the world again?
We do not just help you track the stories, we break them down, explore all the angles, analyze the issues so that you can fully comprehend the stories and use them to make the right decision.